They thought he was just another stubborn Mustang, wounded, wild, and refusing to move. But when the men tried to lead him away, the stallion wouldn't budge. Not because he was afraid, not because he was hurt, because something was still attached to his leg. And when they finally looked down, their hearts broke. This wasn't defiance, it was devotion, and the truth would unravel everything they thought they knew about loyalty. The morning sun hadn't burned through the chill yet. Steam curled off the coffee mugs of the two rail workers checking old lines near Fallon, Nevada. Just another maintenance run on tracks the company barely used anymore. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, until the youngest, Darren, pointed down the slope with a frown creasing his face. "You see that?" At first, Craig figured it was a trick of the heat shimmer, maybe a mule deer, or a cow that wandered off. But then the shape moved, and there was no mistaking the thick neck, the proud arch of the back, and the wind-ruffled black tail. A Mustang, alone, and limping. The horse kept to the edge of the scrub near the old rail line, head low but alert. His right front leg dragged slightly every few steps, like something was pulling on him. Not panicked, just slow, careful. "He's gonna get himself killed if he wanders onto that main track," Craig muttered. They radioed it in standard protocol. Last thing anyone wanted was a train clipping a spooked animal, or worse, a derailment. Dispatch didn't waste time. Within the hour, a local animal control unit was dispatched, with a wrangler in tow. Not because they expected trouble, just because wild horses didn't exactly take kindly to being herded away like livestock. By the time the truck rolled up, the stallion had moved again, but not far. He stood maybe 20 yards from the rails now, breathing hard, flanks streaked with dust and sweat despite the morning cold. His coat, a deep dappled gray, shimmered like storm clouds about to burst. But his eyes, those didn't shimmer, they watched, fixed, not like prey watching predators, more like a sentry. "Something's off," the wrangler said, stepping out of the truck. Her name was Cass. Tall, quiet, with weathered hands and the kind of patience only years in the high desert could teach you. "He's not spooked." "Not really," she said, narrowing her eyes. "He's holding ground." The two animal control officers flanked her, keeping their distance. They moved slow, arms low, murmuring to each other. The stallion didn't bolt, just shifted weight, limped slightly to his left, then stopped again. Cass crouched, eyed the tracks, then the horse, then the dry, cracked ground behind him. "No herd," she whispered. "No signs of others. He's not lost. He stayed." The officers exchanged glances. One reached for the tranquilizer rifle in the truck bed. "No," Cass said firmly, standing. "Not yet. We're not dealing with panic here. We're dealing with something else." The wind picked up, scattering sand across the steel rails. The stallion blinked slowly, then shifted again, still guarding whatever invisible line he'd drawn. Cass frowned, voice low. "He's not refusing to move because he's scared. He's refusing because he won't, and none of them yet knew why." Cass approached first, her boots crunching softly on dry gravel. One hand rested on her rope, the other open by her side, palm facing the stallion like a peace offering. She moved slow, measured, not because she feared him, but because something about his stance made her pause. He didn't flinch, didn't snort, didn't toss his head like so many wild ones did when strangers came near. He just stood there. His body was tense, yes, but not the kind of tension that leads to a flight. This wasn't about getting away. This was about holding position. His front leg trembled now and then, shifting weight, clearly favoring it. But when the two officers moved to flank him, just a few steps wider, his ears pinned slightly, and his eyes darted, sharp and unreadable. "Easy, boy," Cass murmured. "We're not here to take anything from you." Still, he didn't budge. The taller officer, Ramos, tried to cut an angle behind him, see if maybe a gentle nudge or noise might push the Mustang toward the open desert. The stallion took one step, not backward, not sideways, but forward, just a shuffle, then stopped again. Cass raised a hand. "He's not being stubborn." "Then what's he doing?" the other officer, Nyla, asked, glancing around. "He's not tangled, not trapped. He just won't leave." Cass studied the ground again. She wasn't looking at the horse now. She was looking at where the horse was. His hooves had made deep impressions in the soil, like he'd been shifting his weight in place for hours. Not pacing, not circling, just standing. "He's guarding something," she said flatly. Ramos frowned. "We already checked. There's nothing here." "Look at his eyes," she whispered. "That's not fear. That's purpose." The stallion's ears twitched. Not back, not forward. Listening. Cass stepped slightly to the left, slow, watching how the horse reacted. His head followed her, but his body stayed rooted. Only his injured leg seemed willing to bend, and even then, just enough to shift balance. Not enough to turn. Not enough to leave. Nyla opened the truck and pulled out a bag of feed, cracked oats and molasses, the kind no horse, wild or tame, usually resisted. She held it out, shaking it gently so the scent would carry. The stallion flicked an ear. His nostrils flared, but he didn't move. Cass sighed, low and thoughtful. He's not hungry enough to forget, she murmured, and none of them had yet figured out what memory was keeping him locked in place like a statue carved from muscle and dust. But they were about to. Ramos loaded the tranquilizer dart with practiced hands, barely glancing at the stallion. Probably stepped in some old barbed wire, he said, voice casual. That limp? Classic fence cut. Cass didn't respond. She was still watching the horse, every twitch of the ear, every muscle ripple beneath that dust-slicked coat. Nyla pulled out a length of soft rope and stepped off to the side, giving the stallion a wide berth. Or maybe a fight. There's a gash on his left flank. Could be a scrape from a run-in with another stud. Territory stuff. Cass crouched again, elbows resting on her knees. The stallion hadn't bolted, hadn't snorted, but he'd begun to shift, just barely. Each time they moved in a little closer. Not a full step, just weight rolling from shoulder to shoulder, like he was calculating something. Not fear, not flight, instinct. She narrowed her eyes. He's protecting. What? Ramos asked, standing up with the rifle cradled in his arms. You think he's hiding something? I think he's standing over something. Nyla looked around. Ground's clear. No trap, no barbed wire, no bones. You saying he's what? Guarding a cactus? Cass didn't smile. Just look again. She stepped forward slowly, keeping her eyes on the stallion's body. Every time she got closer, his front leg lifted. Not high enough to step, just high enough to shift. And every time, that leg came back down, in nearly the same place. Like a compass needle pulled by something unseen. She stopped within 10 feet. Easy, she said softly. The stallion didn't move. Cass squinted at the ground near his hooves. Something caught the light. A faint glint under the loose dust. Not metal, not quite. Just a strange shape half swallowed by earth and sagebrush. She took one step to the right to angle her view, and that's when the stallion let out a sound. Not a whinny, not a snort, something between a warning and a plea. Low, guttural, barely there. Cass froze. He's not just injured, she said quietly. He's anchored. Not physically, mentally. Ramos sighed. All right, let's just dart him and figure it out once he's down. We've wasted enough time. But Cass didn't answer. She just walked back to the truck, pulled out a hand rake, and returned to the spot near the stallion's hooves. Carefully, so carefully, she brushed back the top layer of dirt and weeds, and what she saw made her stop breathing. A tangle of cord, a collar, a shape, small, covered in dust, pressed against the Mustang's leg like it had grown there. Don't shoot, Cass said, voice breaking, because suddenly it wasn't a rescue, it was a reckoning. Cass didn't move, didn't blink. The wind kicked dust across her boots, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the strange tangle at the Mustang's leg. Metal, rope, something frayed and sun-bleached, half swallowed by dirt. From the front, it had been invisible, just a limp, just a stallion that wouldn't move, but now from the side it was undeniable. Ramos, she called, not loud, just sharp enough to cut through the silence. Drop the dart, now. He hesitated. What? Why? Because something's attached to him. Ramos lowered the rifle, brows furrowing. Like a trap. No, not a trap. Cass stepped closer, slow and steady, eyes flicking between the stallion's face and the shape tangled near his foreleg. The horse's breathing quickened, nostrils flaring. But he didn't bolt, didn't resist. He just watched. The shape shifted slightly in the breeze, and that's when she saw it. A paw, small, barely visible beneath the folds of rope and dirt, matted with grime. Cass knelt, heart in her throat. It's a dog, she whispered. Ramos and Nyla froze. What? Cass swallowed hard. A dog, curled up, collapsed, tied by the leg, and the ropes looped around the Mustang's front hoof. They're connected. She reached out carefully, brushing aside more sand with the edge of her glove. The rope was knotted tightly, digging into the skin of the dog's hind leg, and wrapped around the stallion's ankle like a makeshift tether. Not tight enough to cut circulation, just enough to bind. The Mustang shifted again, barely, and the dog's body rocked with him. That's when Cass understood. The stallion could move, he just wouldn't, because moving would drag the dog. He'd been choosing to stay. Oh my God, Nyla whispered, stepping forward slowly. He's not stuck, he's protecting it. Cass nodded, voice hoarse. He's been keeping the dog with him, guarding it, maybe even trying to get help without leaving it behind. They all stared in silence. No one knew how long the two had been like that, how far they'd traveled, what they'd escaped, or what kind of hell they'd come from together. But whatever it was, they'd come through it together, and the stallion, despite everything, hadn't broken that bond. Not even now. Cass looked up into the horse's eyes, dark, stormy, glinting with something painfully human. You old fool, she whispered. You're not stubborn, you're loyal. The Mustang gave a low exhale. Not a protest, not a surrender, just breath, just trust. And for the first time, Cass felt like he was the one deciding to let them stay. Cass knelt lower, brushing more dirt away with slow, deliberate motions. Her gloves scraped over dry weeds brittle with sun and time. Beneath the layer of dust, the truth emerged piece by piece, like unearthing a secret someone had tried to bury. A collar, worn leather, almost black from exposure, the buckle rusted, the name tag scratched and unreadable. Attached to it, a frayed length of rope, the kind used for tethering dogs in yards where people didn't expect them to stay long. It was looped once, then again, around the stallion's leg. Not tangled, not accidental, intentional. Cass leaned back on her heels. He let it happen, she murmured. Ramos squinted. What? He could have broken free, stepped out, kicked loose. She gestured at the slack in the rope. But he didn't. He's standing here on purpose. The dog, some kind of shepherd mix maybe, lay curled beneath the Mustang's massive chest, barely moving, ribs like piano keys under a coat of dust. His breathing was shallow, but it was there, just enough to keep hope alive. The stallion shifted again, careful, slow, muscles moving like strained cables but not enough to pull on the rope, just enough to block the wind from hitting the dog's side. He's shielding him, Nyla said softly. Cass nodded. Been doing it for a while too. Look at the prints. He stood in this exact position over and over again. The horse's hooves had etched arcs into the dirt, grooves worn from weight shifting, time passing, but never far, never more than a few inches, as if he'd learned how to move just enough to ease his own pain without causing more to the creature below. He's not just staying, Cass whispered. He's choosing to suffer. Ramos was quiet now, eyes narrowed with something heavier than confusion. But why? Nyla answered. Because they're a pair. He's not just guarding the dog. He's bonded. The Mustang's ears flicked at her voice but didn't pin back. There was no fight left in him, only vigilance, loyalty carved into the lines of his stance, exhaustion but not surrender. Cass moved slowly toward the rope, her hand hovered over it. We cut this, he might bolt, or he might fall, Ramos added. He's holding up more than just weight. Cass met the stallion's gaze. Let's not cut yet. Instead, she laid her hand gently on his leg, near the knot. The Mustang tensed, then stilled. One heartbeat, two. Then he let out a breath, long, controlled. He was giving them permission. Nyla blinked hard. He's been holding vigil. Cass nodded. In the desert, in the heat, with a limp, and still didn't leave, because it wasn't a chain holding him, it was a promise. Cass moved slowly now, crouched low beside the dog, her movements quiet and deliberate, like approaching something sacred. The shepherd mix didn't stir. His breathing was paper thin, shallow enough that she had to watch the rise and fall of his chest just to know he was still with them. His eyes were closed, his paws tucked in tight, as if trying to stay warm despite the heat, every rib pressed against skin, every joint angular and sharp. His ears twitched slightly when the breeze shifted, but there was no strength in it, just the lingering reflex of a body running on instinct and will alone. God, Nyla murmured. He's been starving for days. Longer, Cass said, brushing a layer of dust from the dog's spine. This didn't happen overnight. They didn't need a vet to tell them what his body had endured. Paws cracked and bloodied, a gash along the shoulder, half-healed and raw, scars hidden in the fur, some fresh, some old, the kind you don't get from wilderness, the kind you get from people. And still, despite all of it, despite how close to death this dog was, he hadn't died, because something bigger than him refused to let go. The stallion stood motionless above him, casting a broken shadow across the dog's body. His head dipped slightly, just enough for his muzzle to brush against the dog's flank, barely a nudge, more like a check-in. Still here? Still breathing. The dog didn't respond, but the horse didn't stop. He hasn't moved, Cass whispered. I don't think he's left this dog's side in days. Ramos exhaled slowly, the gravity finally hitting. He chose to stay out here, with him. Cass nodded. Any other Mustang would have bolted the moment they got tangled, ripped the rope, kicked free. But this one, she looked up into the stallion's face again. That quiet strength, that stillness, that wasn't fear, but something older, deeper. He had watched the dog fall, and instead of leaving, he'd folded himself around him. The Mustang's body bore its own marks. Flies clustered around dried blood near the hind leg. His right hoof was split along the edge, likely from walking on sharp rock without rest, a fresh welt along his ribs. He'd been hurting, but he hadn't flinched. You carried this weight, Cass whispered, more to the horse than to anyone else. The stallion blinked slowly, the way old men do when they've made peace with something the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet. Two creatures, one broken in body, the other worn in spirit. Yet somehow, together, they had survived a stretch of desert and days of silence, not because they were strong, but but because they had refused to be alone. Two survivors. One promise, still unbroken. The silence thickened as Cass leaned closer, not to intrude but to understand. Her fingers hovered above the stallion's flank, eyes narrowing on a patch just behind his shoulder, hairless, raised, and jagged around the edges. A burn mark. Not from brush fire, not from sun or scrape. This was man-made, deliberate. She didn't say anything right away, just shifted her gaze to the dog's side. Same spot, same shape, only smaller, a circular welt, old but unmistakable. The skin puckered around it, like it had never healed right. Cass sat back on her heels. These two, they've been through hell. Ramos crouched beside her, jaw tight. Those aren't wild injuries. No, Cass said. They're reminders. She looked again at the stallion's legs, thin white lines crisscrossing his knees, like vines made of pain, old whip traces, and higher up, near his chest, was another, angrier, fresher, still scabbed. You see this on horses that been broken hard, she muttered. Bad hands, bad places. Nyla swallowed hard. Same with the dog. The shepherd's paws were scarred around the ankles, likely from being tied too tight, too long. His tail was broken at the tip, and his jaw, when Cass tilted gently, was just slightly out of line, a fracture that had healed on its own. He'd been hit, hard, more than once, and yet he still wagged it, barely, a slow, broken motion when the Mustang nudged him again. He's still trying to greet him, Nyla said quietly. After all that, Cass nodded. Because that horse, that's the only good thing he's ever known. They all sat in silence for a long moment. No one asked where they came from. They already knew. Some backyard nightmare, an unlicensed camp, maybe a failed fighting ring. One of those places people pretend doesn't exist until a busted fence lets the truth spill out into the wild. These two hadn't escaped a storm. They'd escaped people, and the Mustang, he could have run, could have broken the rope and disappeared into the sage like smoke, but he didn't. He'd limped beside this dog across miles of hard land, starving, bleeding, probably chased, and when the dog collapsed, he stopped, sat down, stayed. Cass blinked hard. He chose to be tethered. Ramos nodded slowly, chose to trade freedom for loyalty. The Mustang shifted again, weight trembling in his front leg, still standing, still shielding, and now they understood why. This wasn't just protection. This was memory. This was trauma. This was love that had survived pain and refused to leave it behind. The sun had climbed high now, burning through the morning chill and baking the earth dry. Heat shimmered off the rails as Nyla unrolled a tarp beside the truck, pinning the corners with spare gear and fence posts. The wind tugged at the edges, but it held, just enough shade to make the difference between surviving and slipping away. They laid the dog on a folded blanket. His body barely responded, legs limp, head resting at an unnatural angle, but he was breathing, just barely. That was something. Ramos pulled out the IV kit, steady hands working with quiet urgency. Veins collapsed, he muttered. Gonna have to go subcoin, slower, but safer. Cass nodded, holding the bag high while Ramos eased the needle into the dog's neck. The fluid dripped in with slow precision, soaking into skin that felt more bone than flesh. They didn't talk much, just worked. The kind of work that feels holy without needing to say why. The stallion stayed close, never more than a foot or two away, his hooves shifting with every breath the dog took. He didn't flinch when they moved, didn't protest when they reached across, just stood sentinel, quiet, ragged, and watchful. Cass had seen loyal horses before, seen them pine for herd mates, mourn for foals, even protect humans in a storm. But this was different. This wasn't instinct. This was choice. She brought over a small bowl of sweet feed oats and molasses, softened with water, set it near the Mustang's muzzle. He sniffed it, didn't eat. Try again, Nyla said softly. Cass scooped a little onto her palm and held it out. The stallion looked at her, eyes dull but aware, then turned back toward the dog. Still nothing. Ramos looked up. He's waiting. For what? The dog, Cass said. He won't eat unless he knows he's okay. They sat in silence, waiting for a sign, anything. Then it came, barely noticeable. A twitch of the dog's hind leg, a flick of one paw, slow and shaky, then a sound, weak, barely there, a whine. The Mustang's ears pricked. He stepped forward and lowered his head, nuzzling the dog's side with surprising gentleness. The dog stirred again, just a little, but enough. The horse let out a slow exhale, and only then, only after that did he turn and take a mouthful of the feed, one bite, then another. Cass looked at Ramos. He needed permission. No, Ramos said, voice thick. He needed hope, and now, maybe he had it. The collar was cracked and stiff with dirt, but the tag was still there, bent, half-scraped but legible if you angled it just right. Nyla crouched near the tarp, brushing it clean with her thumb. The engraving was shallow, worn down by time and sun, but one word stood out. Duke, she read aloud. Cass leaned in. That his name? Maybe. Or maybe just what someone called him before they stopped calling him anything at all. She flipped the tag over, a number, faded but traceable. Nyla snapped a photo and sent it to dispatch. Asking for a check through the animal cruelty database, she muttered. Just in case. They didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Then she turned it toward the others. Duke, confirmed. He was registered in a seizure 6 months ago, outside Amarillo, part of an illegal dogfighting ring. Over 60 animals found, most put down, some rescued, a handful escaped before the raid. Case felt something go cold in her chest. And this one, unaccounted for, until now. Ramos stepped away from the tarp, fists clenched at his sides. Bastards probably tried to move him west, dumped the ones that weren't worth money anymore. Case glanced at the stallion. He was lying down now, chest close to the earth, legs folded, but head still lifted, still watching, still guarding. He wasn't part of the dog ring, Ramos said, voice quieter now. So why's he here? Why stay with Duke? Case didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked around the stallion, slow and wide, until she reached the other side, where his hip bore a mark she hadn't noticed before. Not a freeze brand, not Bureau of Land Management, but paint, old, streaked and almost gone. A crude symbol, a number. She swore under her breath. They marked him. Ramos came over and saw it too. His face went tight. They used him, Case nodded, as bait, or worse. Horses didn't fight, not in the way people made dogs fight. But that didn't mean they were safe. Sometimes they were tied up, left to spook the dogs, hurt them, or break them. But this stallion? He hadn't broken. He'd survived, and when the dog had fallen, he didn't run. He stayed. They escaped together. Nyla said softly, crouching beside Duke again. That's the only way this makes sense. They broke out, or were dumped, or both. Case looked at the two of them, scarred, silent, and side by side. No one's claimed them, she said, but they've already claimed each other. And suddenly, the scene wasn't just a rescue. It was a reunion that had never ended. The heat had started to fade, the desert cooling in that slow, breathless way it did when the sun began to sink low behind the hills. Long shadows stretched across the tracks, and the tarp flapped gently in the evening wind. Duke was still wrapped in blankets, his breathing a little stronger now, though his eyes hadn't opened in hours. The IV bag was nearly empty. The stallion hadn't moved from his spot beside him. He'd lain down once, folded his legs beneath him like a monument at rest, but the moment Duke stirred even slightly, he lifted his head again, watching, guarding. Case stood near the truck, arms crossed. We need to make a decision. Nyla nodded grimly. Duke can't be moved, not tonight. We try to load him and he could crash. Ramos ran a hand through his hair, pacing a short distance, and the Mustang won't leave him, not even to walk 5 feet. We can sedate him, Nyla offered, but the words hung heavy, unwelcome. Case shook her head. He's been protecting that dog for God knows how long. If he wakes up in a strange place and Duke's not there, no one said it, but they all understood. It wasn't just stress they'd be risking, it was trust. I'll stay, Ramos said quietly. Both women turned toward him. I've got rations, radio, and my sleeping bag, and if I drive out in the morning, I can lead the transport back here once Duke's stable. Case studied him. Ramos was rough around the edges, gruff, hard to read, but right now his voice was gentle. You sure? She asked. He nodded. They've watched out for each other long enough. Someone ought to do the same for them. They unloaded the last of the supplies, more blankets, a lantern, a small generator for warmth, and built a windbreak with the second tarp. As the sun dipped, the desert went still. That kind of quiet that makes every breath feel sacred. Case knelt beside the Mustang one last time. She didn't try to touch him, just spoke low. He's in good hands now, boy. Just rest. The stallion blinked, then shifted his weight closer to the dog. As the women drove off, taillights vanishing into the dusk, Ramos unrolled his mat beside the two animals. Not too close, just near enough. He sat in the dirt, back against the truck tire, and watched them as the stars came out. Later that night, as the wind calmed and the moon rose, Duke let out a soft, broken whimper. The stallion leaned down and licked his ear. Ramos watched, silent. He'd seen Bond before, dog and handler, horse and rider, but nothing like this. Not loyalty, not instinct. This was something deeper. This was love, raw, wordless, and undefeated. The first light of dawn slid gently across the desert, pale and soft like a whisper. It stretched long across the ground, catching on dew-damp sage and the dull sheen of steel rails. The wind had gone still sometime in the night, and for a moment the whole world held its breath. Ramos hadn't slept much. He'd stayed near the truck, one eye open, listening to every shift of hoof and paw, every small sound Duke made as he fought his way back to the edge of consciousness. The Mustang never left his post. By first light, Duke stirred again, more than a twitch this time, a grunt. His paws flexed weakly, and his nose twitched as if catching the scent of something familiar. The stallion rose first, slow and deliberate, joints stiff from lying so long. He stepped back just enough to give Duke space, but not far. His tail flicked, his ears swiveled, waiting. Ramos sat forward, not daring to breathe. Duke pushed one paw beneath himself, then another. Then, with a groan that sounded too big for a body so thin, he lifted. His legs shook, his back swayed, but he was up, wobbly, narrow-eyed, breathing hard, alive. The Mustang let out a sound then, deep in his chest, quiet, low. It wasn't a snort, it wasn't a whinny, it was breath, a long, slow exhale, like air finally leaving a body that had been holding it too long. Ramos stood, eyes stinging more than he cared to admit. "He's been waiting for that moment," he whispered. The stallion stepped forward and touched his muzzle to Duke's shoulder, gentle, slow, almost reverent. Duke leaned into it, just slightly, tail wagging once in a weak arc. Then, without prompt or signal, they started moving, not far, not fast, but together. Duke took one uncertain step toward the edge of the tarp. The stallion moved with him, matching his pace, flanking his side like a guard escorting a king. The rope still trailed loosely between them, not tugging now, just joining, a bond worn thin but unbroken. Ramos watched them take 5 steps across the morning dirt, then 10, slow, shaky, but forward. It was all the proof he needed, not of survival, of commitment. Later, when Cass and Nyla returned with the transport team, Ramos would tell them about that morning moment, about the way the stallion sighed as Duke rose, as if letting go of something only he had carried, a burden of time, of fear, of love, too large for words. Cass would kneel beside them both and whisper, "You're ready," and the Mustang at last would follow, not because someone led him, because someone stood up, and that was all he'd been waiting for. The trailer door swung open slowly, creaking in protest as the desert wind swept in behind it. Inside, the Mustang stood still, tall, calm, his eyes fixed only on one thing, the shepherd mix curled just outside on a fresh patch of straw. Duke was sleeping, chest rising steady now, paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. The stallion stepped down without hesitation. No rope, no coaxing, just quiet understanding. He moved to Duke's side and lowered his head until their noses touched. That was how they arrived at the sanctuary. Not as strays, not as rescues, but as a pair. The staff learned quickly not to separate them. If Duke was led inside for treatment, the Mustang would wait at the door, still, unmoving until the dog returned. If the stallion was brought to pasture, Duke would hobble along the fence line, watching every step. After a few failed attempts to keep them apart for routine care, the sanctuary gave up and made a new rule. Together, always. Visitors came and went. Children asked questions. Adults took photos. Most just watched. And eventually, someone would ask, always with the same tone of amused wonder, "Why does that wild horse follow the dog?" The answer came easily, spoken like a truth too deep for science and too simple for cynics, because sometimes family isn't who you're born with, it's who you survive with. The scars never faded, not completely. Duke's limp remained. The stallion's burn marks stayed visible beneath his thickening coat, but they wore them like medals now, not wounds, reminders of what they escaped and of what they chose. Duke grew stronger with time, his coat regaining luster, his eyes a little brighter each morning. He still didn't bark, but he didn't need to. He had presence. The Mustang never took a name. They tried a few. Storm, Sentinel, Ghost, but none of them fit. So they let him be what he was, a guardian who didn't need a label. On quiet afternoons, the two could be found resting beneath the big cottonwood tree near the far fence line, Duke curled against the roots, the stallion beside him, head low, tail flicking lazily in the breeze. They didn't ask for attention. They didn't need it, because they had something bigger than rescue, bigger than survival. They had each other, and in a world that had shown them the worst of humanity, they'd found something pure, not in fences, not in freedom, but in loyalty that never once asked to be repaid. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, breathe, and believe again in the quiet power of loyalty, then don't let it end here. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that love doesn't always come with words, and sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in silence and pain. Subscribe to Horse Tales of Wonder for more true stories of resilience, redemption, and the kind of devotion that defies explanation. Because out there somewhere, another forgotten soul is still waiting, not to be saved, but to be seen.